Good afternoon, everyone here and online. I'm Tom Beckett, the Executive Director of IISS Middle East, and I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Colin Kahl, the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy at the US Department of Defense. You'll have read his bio and will appreciate how fortunate we are to have him here at this preliminary session of the 18th IISS Manama Dialogue. His experience is broad and his knowledge of this region is deep. Following last month's publication of the US National Security and Defense Strategies, it is both timely and appropriate that Dr. Kahl is here to discuss the imperative of partnerships in the new Middle East. A war in Europe caused by Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, a regional perception that the US is withdrawing from the Middle East, and regional states seeking a more diverse set of strategic partners, such as Russia and China, combine to highlight the relationship between the US and the Middle East, in particular with the Gulf Arab states, is strained. This tension is not simply the result of the recent OPEC Plus decision. It has developed over the course of US administrations, plural, and let's not forget that it was during President Trump's administration that Saudi Arabia protested the lack of US response to the Abu Qais attack, and this year the Emirates were similarly displeased when Abu Dhabi was attacked. But the Middle East does feel different. Some have said that it is becoming politically non-aligned, yet it remains the West, led by the United States, that stations the service people and equipment that contribute to its defense. I hope Dr. Kahl will describe how the US will navigate the new Middle East and why partnerships to face common threats remain vital for this region. Dr. Kahl will speak for about 15 minutes, and then he'll take questions. In the interest of time, I'll group the questions together, so please catch my eye as I'm sitting over to the side. Please, if you are going to ask a question, identify yourself before you do so. And this is a sincere please, and it's a statement probably is, don't make statements, ask questions. That's what we want to have. So thank you, Dr. Kahl.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I've been told not to make statements and only ask questions, so I'm just going to ask you questions. I don't want to disobey right out of the gate. No, thank you, Tom, for that very kind introduction. Thanks to all of you for joining us tonight. Thanks for all of those who are watching on the live stream. So good evening, everyone. I want to thank IISS for convening the Manama Dialogue. Obviously, you all know that this annual gathering is the critical regional forum for exchanging views on trends shaping the Middle East and debating policy approaches for enabling the leaders, governments, and peoples of this critical part of the world to identify opportunities, as well as risks to stability, security, and prosperity. I also extend warm greetings from Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin to His Majesty King Hamad, His Highness and the Crown Prince and Prime Minister Salman, and to the Bahraini government and people. In his remarks here last year, Secretary Austin discussed the strategic imperative of partnership. He outlined threats that transcend borders, from the climate crisis to pandemics, from cybersecurity to state and non-state terrorism, and to the perpetual instability of governments that seek to deny their citizens fundamental rights and freedoms. Finally, he called for updating and upgrading partnerships in order to effectively address these challenges. It is this theme, the imperative of partnership, that I want to focus my remarks on this evening. As Secretary Austin underscored last year, the United States is fully committed to its partners, not only our longstanding bilateral relationships, but also multilaterally through the concept of what we call integrated deterrence. This concept of integrated deterrence is a cornerstone of the National Defense Strategy, which Tom mentioned was released in unclassified form just a couple of weeks ago. And the National Defense Strategy, or NDS as we call it, makes clear that building the architecture of integrated deterrence means making synchronized investments in cutting-edge military capabilities and concepts across all domains, not just land, air, and sea, but cyberspace and outer space. Deliberately working to enhance interoperability and secure communications across defense sectors, and maintaining a robust schedule of exercises and training to stress test progress and identify areas for improving our potential for collective action. At the strategic level, one of the most important elements of integrated deterrence is leveraging our unrivaled network of partners to build large and effective coalitions to advance common security objectives. And that is exactly what the United States is doing in the Middle East, building a regional architecture together with our partners in order to enhance cooperation, deter adversaries, and set the terms for a more stable, more integrated future. That is present every single day in the experimentation, innovation, exercises, and training that U.S. Central Command is leading. It is evident in the unwavering leadership of the United States that we continue to provide to the 85-member strong global coalition to defeat ISIS across multiple administrations in Washington. It was clear when Secretary Blinken participated in the Negev Summit in March and when the U.S. GCC defense working groups convened in Riyadh the same month. The United States is ready to convene both of these forums again soon alongside our partners. President Biden underscored this commitment himself when he traveled to Jeddah for the GCC +3 summit in July. The Jeddah summit featured commitments to collaborative work on renewable energy, energy market stability, innovation, nonproliferation, counterterrorism, food security, and upholding the principles of international law, in addition to the imperatives of air and missile defense and maritime security. During this historic visit, President Biden reiterated the importance the United States places on its decades-long strategic partnerships in the Middle East region, while also affirming his enduring commitment to the security and territorial defense of U.S. partners. Given this region's increasingly important role as a global trade and technology crossroads, President Biden articulated a framework toward the Middle East based on 5 principles. First, the United States will support and strengthen partnerships with countries that subscribe to the rules-based international order, and we will make sure those countries can defend themselves against foreign threats. Second, the United States will not allow foreign or regional powers to jeopardize freedom of navigation through the Middle East waterways, nor tolerate efforts by any country to dominate another or the region through military buildups, incursions, or threats. Third, even as the United States works to deter threats to regional stability, we will work to reduce tensions, de-escalate, and end conflicts wherever possible through diplomacy. Fourth, the United States will promote regional integration by building political, economic, and security connections between and among U.S. partners, including through integrated air and maritime defense structures, while respecting each country's sovereignty and independent choices. Fifth, and finally, the United States will continue to promote human rights and the values enshrined in the UN Charter. I reiterate these principles to make clear that despite occasional disagreements, the United States remains committed to the region. We're here, and we're not going anywhere. This administration believes that our collective security will benefit from a more integrated coalition of partners, synchronizing actions across political, economic, and security sectors, all within the framework of a rules-based international order. The good news is that we are already moving in this direction. The United States, together with our partners, are moving towards an integrated air and maritime security, increased intelligence sharing and cyber cooperation, and planning for multilateral crisis response. At the same time, looking around the globe, the challenges this coalition faces could not be more acute. In the past year, the world has witnessed the most aggressive threat to the rules-based international order we have seen in decades. In Europe, Russia chose a ruthless, reckless war to try to change by force the borders of its neighbor, Ukraine, seeking to destroy Ukraine's sovereignty, independence, and freedom. Putin's worldview rejects the rule of law in favor of the law of the jungle. Instead of an international community rooted in mutual respect, shared responsibility, and coordinated action, Putin seeks to enforce an outdated view in which small states subordinate national aspirations to the sphere of influence of larger ones. Let's be crystal clear about the implications of Putin's actions, because they extend far beyond Europe. Putin is not only threatening transatlantic peace and security. Left unchecked, Russia's actions would embolden would-be aggressors in other theaters, especially in the Middle East and the Indo-Pacific. The starkest reminder that one region's problems do not stay in that region is the Iranian transfer of attack drones and possibly missiles to the battlefield in Ukraine. Iranian drones are killing Ukrainian civilians, just as they have struck targets in Saudi Arabia and the UAE, targeted Israeli and US forces, and attacked international shipping. But these weapons and their proliferators can be defeated. For example, Ukraine's armed forces are shooting down Iranian drones. We estimate that Ukraine has successfully engaged at least 50% of Iranian drones employed by Russian forces, using everything from guided missiles to small arms. Ukraine has even developed a simple mobile phone application to allow civilians to report drones in order to increase the probability of successful engagements. In the face of this threat, the United States is working with our allies and partners from around the world to deter and disrupt Iran's UAV program before they hit the battlefield. And we are strengthening Ukraine's air defenses to protect their territory and people from Iran-proliferated drones after launch. Since the beginning of the Biden administration, the United States has committed more than $18.9 billion in security assistance to support the brave forces in Ukraine. And we have marshaled additional support from some 50 countries. In fact, you just saw that this week when Secretary Austin convened the monthly Ukraine Defense Contact Group that was started in Ramstein several months ago, and now convenes about 4 dozen countries every month to rally international support for Ukraine. We have also coordinated a diplomatic pressure campaign to isolate Russia while rallying the international community to impose punishing economic sanctions on Moscow. In Europe, the United States and NATO allies have been exercising training and coordinating investments in military capabilities and interoperability for decades. Why do I mention that? Because it was that foundation of cooperation that is now delivering results in real time, as we speak, providing a clear example that when coalitions of like-minded states cooperate, the power in that partnership is palpable. Now, even as Russia employs Iranian drones to rain down on Ukrainian cities, some in this region believe that engagement with Putin can drive a wedge between Moscow and Tehran. But this approach did not deliver in Syria when Russia and Iran doubled down in support of a brutal dictatorship. And it is even more unlikely to work now given Russia's reliance on Iranian weapons for its war in Ukraine. Indeed, a declining and isolated Russia is not only more firmly in Tehran's camp, but is more likely to find common cause with China and North Korea in pursuit of policies that challenge the norms and rules that benefit every citizen, government, company, and non-government organization in this room and across the globe. As our national defense strategy makes clear, while Russia presents an acute threat, the PRC is the only country that has both the intent and increasingly the economic, diplomatic, military, and technological capabilities to fundamentally reshape the rules-based international order. The PRC's pressure campaign against Taiwan threatens peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait, which is critical to global security and prosperity. And its military activities in the South China Sea demonstrate its willingness to threaten and coerce smaller nations to fit their preferences. In the Middle East, we should all be clear-eyed about the PRC's playbook. The PRC has no interest in mutually beneficial coalitions, and Beijing has neither the intent nor the capability to integrate the region's security architecture. The PRC pursues ties based solely on its narrow, transactional, commercial, and geopolitical interests. Period. Meanwhile, Beijing's narrative of neutral engagement conveniently allows it to play both sides. It can attend red carpet regional summits in countries directly threatened by Iran while expanding ties to Tehran, all while bypassing meaningful investments in regional security or stability. Our approach is different. As the recently published National Security Strategy makes clear, and I quote, "The United States will promote regional integration in the Middle East by building political, economic, and security connections between and among U.S. partners, including through integrated air and maritime defense structures while respecting each country's sovereignty and independent choices." I repeat that phrase for a reason. It is at the center of our approach to the region. This is a critical difference between our vision, which aims to preserve the autonomy of all states as we strive to collectively build a regional security architecture, and that of our rivals, which does not. It has almost become cliche to say that we have entered a new age of competition. But let me make clear, this is not a competition of countries. It is a competition of coalitions. Through this lens of coalition building, our national defense strategy is focused on combining our strengths to maximum effect through integrated deterrence, by campaigning to disrupt malign behavior and push back against the full range of competitors' coercive actions, and by undertaking reforms and making investments within our own Defense Department and defense enterprise to build enduring advantages. These lines of effort will enhance U.S. contributions, not only to our own security, but to the coalitions that we support around the world, and make us a better partner. And to achieve this, we are moving away from old ways of thinking about the requirements for security. In the future, success in how we fight will not be determined by the simple arithmetic of boots on the ground, but rather by maintaining our readiness to rapidly respond by flowing forces where they are needed globally and to seamlessly fall in with interoperable allies and partners. That is why we are taking steps now to improve information sharing and interoperability across domains and to establish mechanisms for collective action and shared funding. We are focused on how we bring together our peoples, our capabilities, and our allies and partners to achieve impact. The United States has already demonstrated that embracing these shifts can deliver results. In just the last year, the United States demonstrated our ability to project power and logistics across the globe, harness an unmatched intelligence capability, and fuse it with combat-tested forces to deliver results that benefit the globe. In July, we delivered justice to the leader of al-Qaeda, Ayman al-Zawahiri, in Afghanistan, without forces on the ground. In northwest Syria, where U.S. forces are not present, we twice executed counterterrorism operations against high-value ISIS leaders. In the lead-up to Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, we deployed tens of thousands of forces to Europe's eastern flank in a matter of days. Recently, we worked to quickly share intelligence and bolster defenses for Saudi Arabia against an emerging threat from Iran, aligning our assets to achieve collaborative deterrence. And concurrent with all of these actions, we demonstrated our ability to keep faith with our global partners all over the world, completing over 200 exercises worldwide over the past year alone. As we look to the future, how does this paradigm shift apply to the Middle East? And what does this coalition do for security here in the region? When it comes to Iran, there's broad agreement that Iran's activities are a fundamental source of instability roiling this region. Whether it is Iran's dangerous nuclear steps, its cultivation of violent terrorist groups and militias, its proliferation of advanced conventional weapons and attack drones, its maritime aggression, its dangerous cyber activities, ongoing repression inside Iran, and its continued threats against foreign officials abroad, the consensus is that to meaningfully push back, we must work together. Meanwhile, Israel's entry into U.S. Central Command and the historic Abraham Accords have opened the door to security cooperation with the region's most combat-tested military and intelligence professionals. The opportunities to share early warning, integrate air defense capabilities, expand maritime domain awareness could not come at a better time. And through the Negev process, Bahrain, Egypt, Israel, Morocco, and the UAE, and the United States are deepening regional efforts to work together from defense to food security to clean energy. Through these efforts, we are advancing security, prosperity, and peace for the region and for all of its inhabitants. When others are ready to help expand this circle of peace and security, the door is open with the United States standing by your side. Broad cooperation in the fight against ISIS and al-Qaeda also offers proof of what we can achieve when we work together against common threats. Together with local partners and a global coalition, we rolled back the ISIS caliphate in Iraq and Syria. The leadership of many of you here today is directly responsible for the dismantling of terrorist networks and assistance to vulnerable populations. But there is still more work to do. We must stay the course and continue to expand and improve our coalition to fight the stateless extremist organizations that continue to threaten our security. As we seek to capitalize on new opportunities for cooperation, we can leverage technology faster and more effectively by bringing together advances from the commercial sector, sharing information, and working with allies and partners. The pace of technological change demands that we do business differently, and CENTCOM has become a critical hub for innovation and experimentation. You can see this in the innovation that the U.S. Navy is doing here in the Middle East with Task Force 59. I had the privilege of visiting them today, integrating unmanned systems and artificial intelligence into maritime operations and convening the largest multinational uncrewed exercise in the world. The U.S. Air Force, meanwhile, is working together with our longstanding partners in the Middle East through Task Force 99, standing up partner innovation cells at bases and experimenting with variable payloads on small drones. And the region itself is moving fast to embrace the opportunity of technology, with the United States in a supporting role. The U.S.-Saudi Combined Expeditionary Robotics Operations Center is a great example of the innovation emerging from within this region. Even as the United States upgrades its approach to security, our commitment to the region is enduring. That has been true for decades, and it remains true today. We led coalitions in the Gulf War and again to defeat the ISIS caliphate. As I speak, we maintain a potent force posture and military capability in this part of the world. And day after day, we are enhancing interoperability, aligning investment in new technology and innovation, and expanding the circle of partnership. In short, the United States remains committed to using all instruments of our national power to further peace, promote stable economies, and deter aggression in this vital region and around the world. And as we do, we will continue to stand shoulder to shoulder with our allies and partners to win the competition of coalitions that is so crucial to our common security. Thank you very much. I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you very much, Colin. That was a really excellent tour of the horizon, but also particularly of the Gulf and the Middle East. I will ask one question, then I'll take a couple from the floor and then group those together. And I'm not making a statement, but this is a preamble, which I have to make before I ask the question. And it was back in 2019, and I was looking for the Fifth Fleet commander. And I couldn't find him because he wasn't in the base. And afterwards, I stress afterwards, I found out that he was on the aircraft carrier in the Arabian Sea. Now, being a soldier, I'm not a maritime person, but my appreciation of the situation was that if you're in a time of escalating tension, you don't want a carrier in a narrow and shallow sea, so you put it in the Arabian Sea. And if you want to command a float, because your base could be a target, you go to a command platform like an aircraft carrier. So my presumption, therefore, was that the Fifth Fleet commander and his fleet were in action stations at that time in 2019. And I thought to myself, I wonder where the regional navies are, and I wonder where their fleet commanders are. And you said the way to contain Iran is by working hard together. My question to you would be, how satisfied are you that everyone is working as hard as the United States to contain Iran in the region? And I'll take Hassan al-Hassan, and then one behind you, and then you. So yeah, there with you've both got glasses on, so I apologize, I've got to.
A quick question. I'm Yoel Gojansky from INSS Tel Aviv and the Middle East Institute in DC. It's good to see you again, Dr. Kahl. US-Saudi relations, the way forward. I heard today that bin Salman received some kind of immunity from persecution in the US. Can you elaborate on that, as this is a new direction the US policy is going? Thank you.
I will go to the one in the front and then Hassan al-Hassan.
I'm Asif Shuja from Middle East Institute, Singapore. Towards securing your Middle Eastern allies from a state actor, what percentage of ownership would you assign to United States, 49% or 51%? Thank you.
And over there to Hassan.
Thank you very much. Hassan Hassan, Research Fellow for Middle East Policy at the IISS. Thank you, Dr. Kahl. Two questions direct to the point. The first one is, has the world, has the US, have we all already failed to block Iran's pathway towards a nuclear weapons, if it wanted to acquire one, towards acquiring or possessing a nuclear weapon if it wanted to? My second question is, you mentioned the strategic imperative of partnerships. The US has used foreign military sales and foreign military aid as instruments of coercive diplomacy vis-a-vis its partners on the back of disagreements on human rights and other issues. Bahrain post-2011, Saudi Arabia, the withholding of the sales of precision munitions on the back of Yemen, withholding of foreign military aid to Egypt, and so on and so forth. Is that practice compatible with the strategic imperative for partnerships that you mentioned, and the idea that we are in a coalition versus coalition global competition with China? Thank you.
Great questions. So I'll do my best to go through them, and Tom, you can keep me on track if I miss anything. So Tom, you asked the question of, is the region doing enough to push back on Iran? I think the region is doing a lot more, and doing a lot more together. But I still think we have more to do together, because the challenge is not just one challenge. Even in the questions here, I mean, Iran's nuclear capabilities are at their most advanced state ever.
Yep.
Obviously, despite years of sanctions and maximum pressure, they've been able to build up their arsenal of ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, attack drones. They're not only using them directly, but they've exported them to proxies. They're now using them to rain down on Ukrainian cities vis-a-vis the Russians. They're obviously, they continue to support militia groups and terrorist organizations around the world. They continue to target former senior U.S. officials that they blame for the Soleimani strike. They attack international shipping. We just saw an example of that not too far off the coast of Oman in recent days. In fact, during my visit today to Navcent, I saw the pieces of the drone that hit the tanker. And of course, they're brutalizing their own people. Yeah. So we all have to do more. But it's not going to work unless we do it together. Mm-hmm. And I think the time in which the region could look to any other actor, inside or outside the region, and say, you know what, here, I'll hold your coat, you go do it. I'm not sure that was ever practical. It's not the way forward now. We have to do this together. And I mention that because the United States is the only country in the world that is capable of integrating countries in this region to get after that common threat. So I understand the temptation to hedge. The geopolitical landscape has changed. The distribution of power has changed. I get it. And countries are going to have relations with all sorts of other countries around the world, and that's fine, so do we. And countries are going to make decisions in their national interest, because so do we. So let's talk about what's in the national interest. You look around the globe, and whatever temptation there may be to turn to Beijing or Moscow, they're not going to show up and be able to deliver the ability to knit the region together to deal with Iran. I mean, if you think, when you say it out loud, it's almost laughable, because they're allied with Iran. So turning to Beijing or Moscow to check Tehran strikes me as a fool's errand. It's never going to work. And in fact, it's even less likely to work with Russia than at any time in the past, because Russia used to be the big brother in the equation, and now their army has been so attrited in Ukraine that they are now dependent on Tehran. They are so desperate they're going to the Iranians for drones and Pyongyang for artillery. So they're not going to deliver the security here that the region needs. There are real opportunities, though. The opportunities that you alluded to in the introduction, I mentioned in my remarks. The Abraham Accords, which has unlocked cooperation with Israel, which is the most capable military actor in the region and has extraordinary experience and extraordinary capabilities with intelligence and cyber, conventional, and others. And then I think, not to be marginalized, is Israel's inclusion into CENTCOM, which I think actually provides opportunities just day to day to seize opportunities across the entire region to knit together, especially in the integrated air and missile defense domain and the maritime domain. And again, visiting NAVCENT today and looking at the work that they do with a coalition of dozens of countries and various task forces across the entire stretch from the Arabian Gulf through the Strait of Hormuz, the Arabian Sea, down the peninsula, through the Bab el-Mandab, up the Red Sea. And we can't do it alone, but we can do it alongside dozens of partners from inside and outside the region. So there's enormous potential, but only if we work together, and only the United States, I think, is able to knit the region together in that way. The question on the sovereign immunity for MBS, for the Crown Prince. You read in the newspapers today, it was a decision by our State Department asked by the court a view on whether sovereign immunity applied to MBS given ongoing civil litigation. And the State Department concluded that, because he's now the head of government, under customary international law, sovereign immunity applies to him. That's a legal judgment. It doesn't bear on the facts of the case one way or the other. But other than that, my doctorate is not in law, so I won't opine further on that. Should the United States, should it be 51-49? 51-49 U.S. versus the region. I'll just say this. All countries, first and foremost, will look out for their own national security interests. So, the only country I can guarantee that we have a majority is the United States. What I can guarantee is that we continue to have vital national interests in this part of the world. And a lot has changed, but that is not. That has not changed. You know, I sometimes hear, then why are you abandoning this region? It's interesting. It's an interesting question. So one of my dear friends and who now works with me, Dana Stroll, is our Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East. I had Dana's job 12 years ago. 12 years ago, when I had Dana's job, we had, without the troops we had in Iraq and Afghanistan, which were its own thing, we had 35,000 troops in the Gulf and the Middle East. Do you know how many troops we have today? 35,000. We haven't gone anywhere. We have, we're out of Afghanistan, and we're at a much smaller, more sustainable presence in Iraq and Syria in the context of the defeat ISIS. And you know what? Those were the right strategic decisions for my country. But other than our large-scale presence of tens of thousands of boots in the ground in Iraq and Afghanistan, which is not in the long-term strategic interest of my country, and I would argue for this region, we haven't left. We haven't gone anywhere. So I understand the emotions around it, but the facts don't bear it out in my own view. So whether it's 51-49 or 49-51, all I can say is, countries are going to elect after their national interests, but I think as we all consider our national interests in the region, whether we live here or not, we can't achieve those national interests without working together. And I get back to the core of the story, which is we have to work together. There's a lot of opportunity to do so, and the United States is the only partner outside the region that can stitch the region together. Have we failed to prevent Iran from crossing the nuclear threshold? We have not failed yet, but Iran is closer to the nuclear threshold than they've ever been. Their enrichment capabilities are more advanced. Their centrifuge capabilities are more advanced. They have more enriched material. The so-called breakout timeline for acquiring the first bomb's worth of fissile material is now down to a handful of weeks. When under the Iran nuclear deal, it was extended to more than a year. And we don't have to litigate the benefits or not of the JCPOA or whether it was a good idea to pull out or not. We can just recognize the facts of where we are, which is that Iran is a lot closer to a nuclear capability. So that's something that's changed. What is not changed, however, is the commitment of the United States to make sure that Iran never acquires a nuclear weapon. President Biden made that clear when he visited the region this past summer. He's made it clear at the UN. And you can have faith and confidence in it because it's not just Joe Biden's policy. It's the policy of the United States dating back to Republican and Democratic administrations of my entire adult life have had that position. I think we remain of the view that all else being equal, it would be good to find a diplomatic solution. I think in the near term, the JCPOA is not on our agenda, not when Iranian drones are raining down in Ukrainian cities, not when the Iranian regime is brutalizing its own people. But that shouldn't detract that at some point a diplomatic solution is the preferred one. But let me be clear, if a diplomatic solution is not possible, it is not the only option. And I'll leave it at that. Should security, I think the question over here about, if it's about partnership, why do you ever condition security? I'll say a couple of things. I think we have been pretty good about not conditioning things that are important for the external security of our partners. I think there have been times, oftentimes under pressure from our Congress especially, where we have held up on certain things that have been presumed as being related to internal matters in countries that have been linked to concerns we've had about human rights or repression or certain policies. I think there are also two other realities about the United States. We're a democracy with a certain set of values that will always matter to our foreign policy. That's not a Democratic or a Republican thing. That's an American thing. The other thing is that we have three branches of government in the United States, and the Congress weighs in on issues related to security assistance, and so a lot of the conditions are not imposed by the executive branch, whether again it's a Republican or Democratic administration, but by Congress, and that's natural. That's a part of our system. It's a part of our dialogue. A lot of times, our conversations with our partners in the region are help us help you, help us make the case to Congress. That the aid should move forward. So I know that makes it. I know it's frustrating. I know that makes it frustrating sometimes to deal with the United States. I get it, and I can't promise that we will, never not be frustrating. But we're still better. Don't compare me to the Almighty. Compare me to the alternative. I work for Joe Biden now, but when he was vice president, he used to say that to me all the time. What's the alternative? I mean, you can turn to countries that have fewer conditions, or you don't have to worry about that. That's fine. You'll get equipment that's not nearly as good. You'll get equipment that can't be sustained. You'll get equipment that can't be integrated or interoperable with the equipment that you already have or the equipment that all your neighbors have. And you will ultimately get to a point where you are in so deep with countries like China that it will put natural limits on our ability to cooperate, not for punitive reasons, but because it'll create security risks to our forces and our systems in the region. So are the Americans sometimes frustrating to work with? Of course we are. But don't compare me to the almighty, compare me to the alternative.
Great. So I'm going to take Reem, John Rain, and the gentleman on the left beside Barry Alamuddin.
Thank you, Dr. Kahl. Reem Mumtaz, I'm a research fellow at the IISS on European foreign policy and defense. I'm just interested in sort of getting a bit of detail on one thing you said. You said you support strengthening partnerships with countries that subscribe to rules-based international order. When you are assessing whether a partner subscribes to the rules-based international order, how do you weigh in their position on sanctioning Russia or continuing their relations with Russia, given the current attack on the international rules-based system by Russia? Thank you.
Can I answer this? Because and then we'll go around.
Of course you can.
And I know, so it's a really good question. Look, every country is going to make its own decisions, its own sovereign decisions, and I understand that every country's relationship with particular other countries is going to generate incentives and interests that cut in different directions. I get it. But I think I tried to make this point in my remarks, but what Russia has done, what Putin has done in Ukraine, is not just about Europe. It's about what kind of world we want to live in. We have lived in a world where large, autocratic, revisionist regimes have gone on the march to carve out spheres of influence. That world was called the 1930s, and it resulted in the most cataclysmic war in human history. None of us should want the 2030s to look like the 1930s. So we have to take a stand. We have to take a stand. Because it may feel like it's very far away if you're sitting here in Manama or in Abu Dhabi or in Doha or Riyadh or wherever. But the precedent that's being established of the law of the jungle trumping the rule of law is something that will be exported. And if you're sitting in, South or Southeast Asia or in Northeast Asia, you have to be very worried about what lessons Beijing is going to draw from how the international community reacted to what Putin did. And if you're sitting in Tehran, you're also taking note. So I understand the near-term imperatives. I understand the tensions, the dilemmas, the costs. It's all real. I don't want to downplay it. But yes, this region has a stake in what happens in Ukraine, and this region needs to do more. Because it's the right thing to do, and because a world in which Russia's actions go unpunished is not a world any of us would want to live in.
Thank you. So we will go Baria first, gentleman to your right, and then John Rain.
Thank you so much. Barry Alamuddin, I'm a writer and journalist and a member. Sir, it's very interesting how you mention all what Iran does, and I totally agree with the evils it does in this area. However, when you mention how you deal with ISIS and when you deal with Al-Qaeda and the success stories you had, we don't hear stories about how you deal with other terrorist organizations like Al-Hashd al-Sha'bi, the PMU, the PMF, or my own Hezbollah in Lebanon, where I come from, or other organizations. These are terrorist organizations indeed. Thank you, sir.
Just, yeah.
Yeah, assalamu alaikum. Mohammed from Saudi Arabia. I'm the director of the Iranian Studies Institute in Riyadh. My question is regarding my country. It's been more than 3 years. There is no U.S. ambassador to Riyadh. What does that mean to the United States and the possibility of fixing the troubled relationship? The other question is regarding the Iranian nuclear program. I strongly believe that they are about to have these capabilities. Is it acceptable for the United States if this happened to extend their nuclear umbrella to the Gulf states to sustain the imperative relationship between allies? Thank you.
Thank you. And then, Barry, if you could pass it just to your...
Sure.
Thank you. Just here, just beside you. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. And thank you, Dr. Kahl, for your comments so far. I wanted to ask you about your phrase, competition of coalitions, which is very striking. Is there going to be room for neutrals? And if so, what would you like them to do and be?
Maybe answer that question first, and then I'll go to the top. A lot of it depends on what the term neutral means in this category. Can countries have relations with all sorts of other countries? Of course. Our national defense strategy defines China as our pacing challenge. The United States has lots of relationships with China. Our economy is highly intertwined with China. We have diplomatic relations. Our president just met with Xi Jinping. So countries should and are expected, it's perfectly natural to have relationships with all sorts of countries. And it's not our policy that countries have to choose. This is not some new Cold War in which it's our way or the highway. But a couple of things. First, when dealing with relationships, one has to trade off costs and benefits. And as it relates to the security sector, the benefits of relationships with Beijing and Moscow are limited. On the Russia side, we see every day the limitations of their military equipment and capabilities, and frankly, they're going to be pretty focused for the next decade or more on rebuilding their own military and not sustaining defense partnerships around the world, even if one had confidence in their equipment. In Beijing, their equipment doesn't come, first, it's not as good, doesn't come with the sustainment and the ability to plug and play with the equipment that already exists in this part of the world. But more importantly, Beijing has neither the capability nor, frankly, the interest in stitching together a regional security architecture. So you can have a great shiny piece of kit, an air defense system, a fourth or fifth generation aircraft. It doesn't mean very much if it can't communicate, if it can't integrate, not only with the stuff you already have, but with your neighbors. And no other competitor of the United States can bring that. And that's just an objective fact. And that's not going to change anytime soon because China neither has the capability nor, as I said, the intention of playing that role. But there's another variable, and here's where the choice is something that's in our national interest. At a certain point, across a certain threshold, if our closest allies and partners cooperate too deeply with China on the security side, it'll create security risks for us. Getting into certain networks that create real cyber vulnerabilities and risks for us. Infrastructure that generates real intelligence risks for us. And networks that touch our military networks that create real risks for us, or a presence in certain countries that allows surveillance of our forces and what we're doing in ways that presents a threat to us. So there should be no illusion that across some threshold, raising the ceiling too much with Beijing will lower the ceiling with the United States. Not for punitive reasons, not because we're vindictive or frustrated or mad or anything, but because of our self-interest. It won't be safe for us to partner as deeply or as broadly. So I think just in that equation, countries should have relationships with Beijing. That's fine. I would caution against going too deeply on the military side because I think the risk is high and the reward is low. On the how should we deal with Iranian-backed terrorist organizations, whether it be in Iraq or in Lebanon or in Yemen or elsewhere? I will say there's no one solution. The solutions have to be highly tailored to the particular circumstances. Let me tell you a few of the things that we're doing. First, we're trying to build the capacity of legitimate governments in places like Lebanon as counterweights to groups like Hezbollah. We've worked for a long time with elements of the Iraqi security forces and have good relationships with them. So there are places where we will continue to build capacity. Every single day, we're involved in sharing intelligence with our partners in the region so that they can interdict supplies of weapon systems coming in or head off imminent threats of particular actions. Every day we're working aside a coalition of countries in the region and around the world to interdict supplies on the high seas as Iran tries to move things in. And when we get attacked, we'll defend ourselves. Iranian-backed groups have struck us in Syria, and we've hit them back, and we'll continue to do that. And when our partners come under threat, we'll work alongside them to figure out what the right answer is too. So a couple of weeks ago, a threat stream emerged as it related to Saudi Arabia. We instantaneously shared that information with Saudi Arabia. It not only allowed Saudi to send some messages that I think bolstered deterrence. It also allowed the United States to reposture some of our own forces in the region to make sure that Iran knew that if they were to carry out some type of attack, everyone would know who did it and it would likely be defeated. In the aftermath of an attack in any particular place, we're going to have to consult with our allies and partners about the best response. It's not a situation in which it's always going to be the United States. In many circumstances, it may be the United States enabling other actors to do certain things and with our assistance. This question about Iran and you mentioned nuclear umbrella. I really took more of the nuclear shadow that Iran's program could cast over the Gulf. Look, I think that Iran is not a nuclear weapons state, but its nuclear capabilities are increasing, and its ability to weaponize those capabilities is increasing. As I said before, the United States policy remains that we will not allow Iran to possess nuclear weapons, period. And again, that's not just our administration, it goes back multiple administrations. But you're right, and one of the reasons that that policy remains so firm is that an Iranian nuclear weapon would cast a long shadow over this region, and I think that there would be a concern that Iran could use a nuclear deterrent actually to do more of what it's already doing, which is to foment militancy and terrorism and destabilize regimes under the view that it could safely hide behind a nuclear deterrent. And so that's one of the many reasons why it's not a good idea if Iran gets nuclear weapons, which is why it remains US policy that they're not going to get nuclear weapons. No ambassador in Riyadh. I mentioned earlier we have a number of branches of government. I wish sometimes we were more efficient as a US government in getting senior officials in places, because it is important for all the reasons that you mentioned that we have senior representation around the world to include with our close partners here in the region.
Dr. Kahl, IISS is supposed to be a very disciplined organization, but this is really too good to stop on time. Would you mind if I took two more questions?
I would not
Only
mind at
two
all.
more.
Yeah.
And the questioners must
As long
be...
as you turn the internet off. No, I'm just kidding.
And the questioners must be very brief. The first is Alan Duncan, and then the gentleman at the back row there. So, Alan, if you could take the microphone.
Oh, thanks very much. Alan Duncan, former British foreign minister, and so glad now to be out of British politics. There's a rusting old tanker moored off Hodeidah, off Yemen, full of a million barrels of crude oil, been there for 7 years, is falling to bits. If this breaks up, you are going to have the most appalling environmental catastrophe. You'll put 1 million barrels of crude into the Red Sea, and the Red Sea will become the Dead Sea. People have been campaigning to have this addressed for ages. It's largely blocked by the Houthis. When are we going to see the necessary partnership between the US defense to give a security guarantee around a salvage operation and sweep for mines, the US State Department and other relevant countries to work with the UN to address this problem before it does the damage it will inevitably do if action is not taken fast.
And then the gentleman in the back row.
Yeah, thank you. Rob Mogilnicki with the Arab Gulf States Institute in Washington. You mentioned China's role in the Middle East a number of times in your opening remarks and in the question and answer period. But we know that the scale and the nature of Chinese engagement and influence across the region varies tremendously from country to country. So what countries are you most concerned about when you think about China's presence in the region? Thank you.
So just on the oil tanker issue, I will admit not to being deeply informed on that issue, but it is something that I'll ask my team to look into more. But I mean, it sounds dire. But as it relates, yeah, I was struck by the Red Sea, Dead Sea point in particular. So it's something we'll have to follow up on. So I appreciate you raising it. The scale of PRC, look, I mean, it depends on the scale of what. I think that I don't want to single out particular countries. I'll just say this, that, I think there is sometimes a sense that when one operates with Beijing that strings don't come attached, but I think a lot of times it's just because the strings are hard to see. I think that the overall plan is to use the Belt and Road Initiative to create dual-use infrastructure. And by that I mean a commercial port that 10 years from now or 15 years from now morphs into a base. I think there's an interest in dominating the commanding heights of technology, the infrastructure around that technology, and the norms and rules that govern that technology. And all of that serves an ulterior purpose of Beijing getting access to that data and dominating the technologies that will define our lives for the rest of this century in ways that I do not think are compatible, at least with the way of life that I'd like to engage in. I think the thing that worries, but people are going to do business with China, and they should, and that's fine. I think the point I've been making here is just there's a certain degree of security cooperation or intelligence cooperation with China that will create real challenges for the continued partnership between the United States and certain countries. And that's not, it's not in our interest to see those partnerships be compromised, and we don't think it's in our partners' interests either. So we're having those conversations, and I think it's increasingly understood. But again, it's also just that the upside is not all that great. Because I just do not believe that China or any other country in the world is capable of winning the competition of coalitions, because they're actually not interested in building coalitions. I'll just leave it at that. Thanks.
And I'd just like to say, thank you very much. I'm not going to dare try sum up most of this, but what I thought, when you said America continues to have vital national interests in this region, people should take reassurance from that. When you said that you wish to help do it together, that's also a point. As you all know better than me, the region continually wants reassurance of continuing American commitment. And when you say it isn't always heard, so it has to be said often with emphasis and with detail, and you provided that emphasis and detail today. So thank you very much for a brilliant piece of work. Thank you very much indeed.